anyone hear me? Policeman, can you hear me? Go on. No. Okay. So I'm Dr. Emily Grossman. I'm a science communicator, science broadcaster, writer, educator, and most importantly, I'm one of the coordinators of a group of scientists internationally across the globe who are here with us called Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. In our community, we have a scientist declaration that has been signed by over 170, in fact 190 currently this morning, scientists, climate scientists, top-level researchers and academics from across the globe. And this declaration sets out the current crisis on the climate and ecological emergency. It sets out the fact that fossil fuels emissions are still rising steeply, that not enough is being done, and that if we don't curb this, we are in really catastrophic circumstances. This is evidence that has now been verified by 99% of climate scientists across the globe. So the reason that I'm here today is I wanted to take this opportunity to lay out for anyone who I'm sure is not you here, but anyone who might be watching or listening on live streams, or the people that you might be interacting with when you go home, or people you speak to. I wanted to lay out what the current situation is as verified by over 99% of climate scientists across the globe. I want to lay out what exactly is happening, why it's happening, how it's happened, how we know that it is human caused. I want to try and address some of the common questions that skeptics ask about the climate crisis, about some of the common points that people make to say, oh, but it's not real, oh, but it's not really happening. And I want to try and really confirm the fact that this really is a climate and ecological emergency, and it really does require us to be here taking action against the government. It's not enough for us to just do our bit at home. We've got way past that point. So as I go through, I've got a lot of information that I want to share with you that's been collated by climate scientists across the globe, and that's been brought together by the fantastic XR Scientists Emergency Team, who have been working tirelessly for the last 6 months at least to bring together all of the current peer-reviewed, evidence-based science. This is unequivocal. So I'm going to be sharing that with you over the next period of time. And as we go through, I really want to challenge you. Ask me questions. Ask me whatever it is that maybe other people are asking you. Ask me what people on social media are saying. Oh, but this. Oh, but isn't it this? Oh, but it can't be true because of this. Ask me those questions. I may not be able to answer all of them, but let me have a go. So just a bit about me. Like I said, I'm a science communicator. My background is that I've got a first-class degree in natural sciences from Cambridge University. I've got a PhD in cancer research, and I now work as a science broadcaster across various channels. I write books about science, and I give talks about science in schools and universities and at science festivals. So let me clarify, I am not a climate scientist. However, since I attended the rebellion in April, I knew nothing about climate science back in April. I came to the rebellion to support my partner, who was drumming with the Samba band, who are incredible, as I'm sure you'll all agree. And he asked me to come along just to come and say hi, and he deliberately didn't want to kind of try and persuade me that this was something I should get involved in. Not at all. So I came along and I was like, what's going on? And I started to actually talk to people, and then I started to do some reading, and I was like, hang on, there's an emergency, but why are we not talking about this? Why do people not know? Why is this not being reported? You know, I'm a science communicator and I know nothing about this. So I started doing my own research. I started talking to climate scientists. I started reading the research, the original papers, not just the stuff you see on various different news reports that's kind of got conflicting information, but I went back to the original sources and I read everything I could for the last 6 months. And that's why I'm standing here today, having just come along in April just to kind of like bang a drum and say, okay, this sounds great. Now I want to stand here and say, no, this is real. This is completely real and completely true. And the reason that we're here is because we need to stop catastrophic and devastating effects on us, humans, wildlife, our planet, which could start, well, it's already happening across the globe, and it's going to happen a lot more. And we currently have 8.5 years to get down to get really down to the sort of emissions that we need to do in order to get to this magic 1.5 degrees level that the IPCC and various different organizations, governmental organizations, say we need to get to in order to stop catastrophic impacts on our planet. So before I begin, would anyone like to kick us off with any questions or anything that they might like to know? And I really encourage you, ask the basic questions here. You know, you can say, what are greenhouse gases? What is global warming? How do we know it's us? If they're not your questions, perhaps they're questions that your family or that your friends have asked you, to kind of really say, well, hang on, really, do you really need to be sitting on the street gluing yourself to things or trying to get arrested? So does anyone want to kick off? Yeah. Can someone repeat that back to me? Okay, is it going to be serious, and how serious in the UK? So the thing is, we need to get to within 1.5 degree warming since pre-industrial times. We're currently on 1.1 degree warming. That's a huge increase. Even though it sounds like a tiny, tiny amount, that's a huge increase in our global temperatures since pre-industrial times. We haven't had these sorts of increases in carbon dioxide levels and in temperature levels for over 3 million years. Now, it is true, yes, that we have been hotter before. We have had higher carbon dioxide before, but we're talking 250 million years ago. And we're talking at a time when we had 97% extinction of life on Earth. We're also talking at a time when warming and carbon dioxide levels went up incredibly slowly. We're talking about them rising slowly over thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. We have never experienced, in the UK or globally, this level, this rate of increase of carbon dioxide levels, this rate of increase in temperature. We are currently at 411 parts per million carbon dioxide. It has certainly never been that high for 3 million years. And even when it was, like I said, 97% of the species died, including, well, it was a completely different planet to how it is today anyway. But the point is, it went up very, very slowly. So what impact will this have? Well, across the globe, it is already having massive impact. You're hearing all the time, I'm sure, about extreme weather, heat waves, droughts, monsoons, floods, hurricanes. There have now been more than 230 of what scientists call attribution studies. Now, this might sound like, what on earth is that? What this means is these are studies that link directly the impacts, the extreme weather situations to climate change. Now, of course, we can never say, it's impossible to be able to say, yes, this caused this. However, there have been quotes to say that hurricanes have been made 5 times more likely by climate change. Heat waves, for example, the one last summer, have been made up to 100 times more likely due to climate change. The sorts of extreme weather that we are getting is leading to billions, hundreds of billions pounds worth of damage that is 2, 3, 5, 10, 100 times more likely to have happened due to climate change. It's happening overseas and it's happening here. We're getting flood warnings all the time. We're getting extreme weather. We're getting flash floods. We're getting countless loss of life, loss of income, loss of farmland. Air pollution is another big one. You see, people get confused between, or not confused necessarily, but muddled with all this reporting of like climate change versus damage to our environment, human-caused damage. The point is they're two different crises, but they are linked. We have climate change, which is caused directly as a result of this 1.1 degree warming. What that means is that because of fossil fuel emissions such as carbon dioxide that have been pumped into our atmosphere since since the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, carbon dioxide is what we call a greenhouse gas. What that means is that it traps heat that is leaving the Earth, which would be radiated back out to space. Heat that has come from the sun warming the Earth. Now, it's not true to say that greenhouse gases are bad. Greenhouse gases keep us alive. If we didn't have greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, it would be minus 18 degrees at night. I would not like to live here under those circumstances. They keep us alive. They're a snuggly blanket that keeps us warm around the Earth. Forgive me if that's patronising for those who know a lot more, but believe me, there's an awful lot of us out there who actually don't know very much but are afraid to ask. So please do continue asking questions if there's anything that isn't clear. So, This snuggly blanket of greenhouse gases is the most impactful one is carbon dioxide. That's doesn't necessarily have the most impact on heating, but it actually stays in the atmosphere for the longest. It stays in the atmosphere for about 100 years. Another greenhouse gas that has a big impact is methane. That has quite a lot more impact than carbon dioxide, but it doesn't stay around for very long. So since the Industrial Revolution, we have been burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels use oil, coal, not so much these days, and natural gas. Oil, coal and natural gas were formed millions of years ago by dead creatures being trapped beneath rocks and underneath the ocean. We are now digging them up and burning them to release energy. Now this is great, they release tons of energy. However, as they burn, they convert the carbon in the bodies of these dead sea creatures and dead plants. That gets converted into carbon dioxide, which means that we're releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that should not be there. It should have been there millions of years ago, fine, when we weren't here, but it shouldn't be there now. Also, since the Industrial Revolution, well actually since way before that, we're increasingly clearing our forests and clearing our trees. Now trees are a natural way of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by photosynthesis, and they trap the carbon and carbon dioxide into their trunks, into the leaves, into the body of the plant. So we are also cutting down these trees, which means we're not able to remove as much carbon dioxide as we had been in the past from the atmosphere. In addition, when we burn those trees, we release that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So we've got like a triple whammy going on with deforestation. In addition, since way before the Industrial Revolution, but far more these days, when we clear this land of trees, we're clearing it to make space for cattle, for grazing. Now, fun fact here, every single cow on this planet, every single day, burps 15 party balloons worth of methane. There you go, you can use that fun fact to entertain your friends at the dinner table. So, 15 party balloons worth of methane every day, every cow. Now, methane, as I said, is a very potent greenhouse gas. Very, very potent. It may not stay in the air for as long as carbon dioxide, but it's very potent. So humans are causing all of this addition of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And this is absolutely unequivocal. According to the IPCC, the International Panel of Climate Change, Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, and according to 99% of climate scientists. So we are adding this carbon dioxide, we're adding this methane, and the consequence is that our snuggly blanket, which is supposed to be there, is getting thicker, and that's not supposed to happen. That means we're heating 1.1 degrees. So what is the impact? The impact is, firstly, directly, 1.1 degree of warming means that more water evaporates from the ocean. So 1.1 might not sound much, but a slightly warmer atmosphere means more water evaporates, which means more water ends up as water vapor in the atmosphere. And you don't have to know an awful lot about physics to know that water vapor turns into clouds, which falls as rain. Therefore, we are getting more rain. Hence floods, hence flash storms, hence changes to our climate in the UK and across the globe. Now, one common question that people ask is, well, actually, it doesn't feel much warmer here. Actually, sometimes it feels colder. Well, that's true. There are places on the planet that are getting slightly colder at various points. There are places on the planet that are getting much warmer. The Arctic, for example, is heating up twice as fast as the rest of the world. As you balance it out, when you even it out, that ends up as being 1.1 degrees overall. And of course, I'm sure you can imagine that the fact that the Arctic is getting the biggest hit is particularly devastating. Now, this 1.1 degree of warming not only causes changes to our rain, but it generally causes changes to our entire climate systems. 1.1 degree of warming is enough, especially with the excess warming at the poles, to change the jet stream. Now, you've probably heard mention of the jet stream. You've heard it talked about probably if you ever watch the weather forecasts. The jet stream is what controls our climate and our weather. The jet stream relies on there being quite a big temperature difference between the equator and the poles, particularly the North Pole. Now, because of this uneven warming, the temperature difference between the poles and the equator is actually getting less. That means that the jet stream is basically getting disrupted. So instead of flowing as a nice sort of flow of energy from one side of the continent to the other, it goes all wiggly. Now that's a bit of a non-technical term, but what that actually means is that there are big changes to our climate systems that is not supposed to be happening. Hence why we get floods, droughts, storms being far more likely. So as well as these direct impacts of the 1.1 degrees on our weather system, we also have the impacts on the sea. Now, as I said, 1.1 degrees causes more evaporation off the ocean, therefore more rain, but it also causes expansion of the ocean. Again, some basic physics is that when water gets hotter, not only does it evaporate more, but it expands, it takes up more space. That, coupled with the fact that this 1.1 degree is causing melting of ice in the ice caps in the North Pole, in the land ice, in Antarctica, in the glaciers, in Iceland, in the Himalayas, in the European glaciers, they're all melting. Over the last 40 years, ice has been melting on this planet if we balance it out overall, at a staggering rate of the equivalent of 300 double-deckers worth of ice every second. That's how fast the ice is melting across this planet for the last 40 years. So all of that brought together in terms of the water and the ice means, of course, that sea levels are rising. And even tiny rises in our sea levels can cause catastrophic impacts on people living in coastal areas near to the sea. It only has to go up by a small amount for those areas to start getting flooded. So this brings me to sort of like, where's this going? What's going to happen? Because if we carry on warming, which we are on course to do, you may have heard, Parliament declared a climate emergency. We're doing our best to reduce fossil fuel emissions. It's not happening. It's lip service. Have you got a question? Go for it. Right. Yeah. So, yes, good point. I'll come back to that. So, the question was that government put a lot of faith in carbon capture schemes. Actually, I won't come back to it. The fact is they don't exist yet, at least not nearly to the extent to which they're needed in order to fit with what is required by the Paris Agreement and what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have said that we need. These carbon capture techniques are just simply not there yet. And everyone's saying, okay, well, the scientists will figure it out. It's not happening. I've been talking to climate scientists. It is not happening. So we can't rely on that. Like I said, Parliament declared a climate emergency, but what did they do? Their own internal advisors carried out a report in July to look at how many of the policies, the goals that they promised to put in place to combat emissions were currently in place. They found 7 out of 24 promises had any action being taken on them. 7 out of 24. And those were the policies that were essential in order to start bringing down global greenhouse emissions, our greenhouse emissions, to the extent that's required to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming. Now, you've probably heard that the Paris Agreement has said that we have to stay within 1.5 degree of warming, at the very most 2 degrees of warming, in order to not have devastating impacts on our planet. There are people like the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who said that by the time we get to financial instability, it will be too late. There are people from the UN saying that the current rates of warming, unless we limit it to 1.5 degrees, in fact, even if we do, there could still be huge impacts. The current rates of warming are going to lead to crop losses across the world. We're going to lead to temperatures that make farmers unable to actually tend to the land. They're going to make the risk of forest fires, droughts, floods impacting crops across the world much, much, much more likely. In the UK, we import 50% of our consumables, what we eat. We import 70 to 80% of our fruit and vegetables. Imagine what will happen when that starts to fail in other countries. This is not like, fantasy land of like 30, 40 years time. This is what could start happening very, very soon. This is what climate scientists are saying will start happening very, very soon. The problem that we have is that no climate scientist can stand here and say this is what is going to happen. That is why this issue has not been acted upon, because governments have said, wait till you're sure, wait till you know, wait till it's definite. Climate scientists are scientists. They are governed by the fact that they cannot say certainty unless it's 100%. So they have not said certainty, and therefore nobody has listened. But climate scientists are now saying it is pretty likely, it is very likely. Would you get on an aeroplane if it was pretty likely it would crash? Or would you say, no, let's wait until it's 100% sure? Would you do that? It's insane. But governments are still saying, actually we're not sure, oh, we're already doing enough. Governments across the world are still today investing £300 billion worth of money in fossil fuels. We are being told in the UK that the emissions are going down. This is not the point. Our emissions might be going down. First of all, they're not going down nearly fast enough to be able for us to be even remote have a chance of being safe. Second of all, they may be going down, but that's because we're outsourcing all of our fossil fuel emissions. Governments in the UK are spending £2.5 billion in the last 5 years on fossil fuel emissions from countries overseas, mostly from middle to low income countries. And then they're saying, oh, but our fossil fuel emissions are going down. It's irrelevant. That's not what our government are doing. The government here invests more in overseas fossil fuel emissions and subsidies for fossil fuel emissions than any other country in the EU. And yet we're still saying, oh, we're doing enough. Plus, there's the fact that we have a debt. We started the Industrial Revolution. That's pretty cool. However, that means that we have actually produced the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions. The cows burping methane, the factories, the cars pumping out carbon dioxide as a result of burning fossil fuels. That is where it's coming from. And that has been started by the UK. That's our responsibility, not only to do what is needed, which we're not doing, but actually to do more than what's needed, something called carbon equity. If we use our share of what's left of our carbon budget to have... What's that?
The hearse is going.
They're taking away the hearse. Let's have a moment of recognition of the hearse. About the ecological crisis, because I've not really talked about that yet. But let me just finish what I was saying about carbon equity. So not only do we have a responsibility because we produce most of the carbon, but also if we stick to zero emissions by 2050, which by the way is not happening. Whatever the government say, it is not happening. They're pumping out more. However, even if we were to get there by 2050, by about 2030, when we'll have used up so much of our fossil fuel carbon budget from across the world that we'll have left basically nothing for less developed countries to use at all from 2030 to 2050. That's what's known as carbon equity. So yes, we could get on track to getting down to net zero by 2050, but if we do that at the rate that's been suggested, we're basically stealing from the other countries across the world, except for the other big producers like China and India and the States. Of course, the question is, how do we get them to do it? We need to lead on this. We need to lead on this. We need to set an example. We need to do what we can do. There is no point saying, well, what's the point? Because China isn't going to do it. What's the point? Because the state America isn't going to do it. We need to do what we can do. We need to set an example, just like we need to do on a personal level what we can do. We need to set an example by doing what we can do individually, by not flying so much, by eating less beef and lamb particularly, by cutting down on cars is a big one. There's a lot of false advertising out there about what we can do personally, and then we can go around feeling kind of like proud of ourselves and feeling smug. Really, the only things that we can do that will make any impact, and even that is a drop in the ocean compared to systemic change, compared to governmental structural change that's required. The really biggest things that we can do are to not fly unless it's really essential, to not use cars unless it's really essential, to cut down on beef and dairy and the dairy industry unless it's obviously really essential. These are the things that we can do that will make an impact. The rest is basically lip service. So yes, question. Of course. Why didn't I go there first? The biggest thing we can do of all is to have our voices heard, because we can only do so much, in fact very little individually. The biggest thing that we can do is to speak out, lobby our MPs, get our voices heard by the government, The government has created a situation where we depend on fossil fuels, where we depend on consumerism, where it's based on greed, where it's based on excess, where it's based on spend, where it's based on capitalism. I'm not saying down with capitalism. I'm not going to make this political. However, read between the lines. You know, what needs to happen is we need to not use so much, we need to not waste so much, we need to not buy so much, we need to not consume so much. But we can't do that when the structures that are in place from the government are not allowing us to do that. We depend on that. Is there something going on there? We need a legal observer over here. Can we have a legal observer at the back of Trafalgar Square? Okay, there's loads of them. Fine. Did that answer your question? Yes, and so the most important thing we can do is, of course, what we're all doing here right now, which is taking to the streets, protesting non-violent direct action. Our declaration of non-violent direct action, scientists' declaration of non-violent direct action, has been signed by, current count this morning when I last looked, 190 top scientists and researchers and academics, about half of them climate scientists from across the globe, saying specifically that we need to take non-violent direct action because we've tried everything else.
Can you read it?
Can I read it out? Does anyone from the science table, can you get me over a copy of the scientist declaration? I'm being, hold on a minute. I have it in my paper bag.
She's standing on one leg.
Right.
You all are.
Sorry. Here's what I prepared earlier.
Blue feet all over again.
Blue feet all over again. I'm old enough to remember that. Anyone else?
Woo!
Okay, so Scientist Declaration of Rebellion. This declaration has been signed, like I said, by 190 top scientists, a lot of them professors, a lot of them PhD holders, well, all of them PhD or MSc holders across the globe, a lot of them top climate scientists from across the globe. Here is our declaration. As scientists, we have dedicated our lives to the study and understanding of our world and our place in it. We declare that scientific evidence shows beyond all reasonable doubt that human-caused changes to our Earth, changes to our land, our seas and our air are severely threatening the habitability of our planet. We further declare that overwhelming evidence shows that if global greenhouse gas emissions are not brought rapidly down to net zero, if biodiversity loss is not halted, we risk damage to our planetary life support systems that is catastrophic and irreversible, causing incalculable human suffering and many deaths. We note that despite the scientific community first sounding the alarm on human-caused global warming more than 4 decades ago, no action taken by government so far has been sufficient. Global greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise steeply. Biodiversity loss continues at an ever-increasing rate. We now call for immediate and decisive action by governments worldwide. We call for governments to halt greenhouse gas emissions. We call for governments to take action to prevent further biodiversity loss. And we call for governments to restore to the fullest extent possible the damage that has already been done. We urge governments to provide particular support to those who will be most affected by climate change and by the transition to a sustainable economy. As scientists, we have an obligation beyond merely describing and understanding the natural world. We must now take an active part in helping to protect it. We note that the scientific community has already tried all conventional methods to draw attention to the crisis. We believe that the continued governmental inaction over the climate and ecological crisis constitutes a crime against humanity. We believe that this crime now justifies non-violent direct action which goes beyond the bounds of the law. We are therefore actively supporting those who are rising up peacefully against governments that are failing to act proportionately to the scale of the crisis. We believe it is our moral duty to act now, and we urge other scientists to join us to protect humanity's only home. Like I said, that declaration has been signed by 190, probably more since I last checked my Google Doc this morning. Probably more than 190 scientists from across the globe. Senior researchers, academics, people who are really, really now wanting to make their voices heard, having tried every other method as scientists. We're not supposed to be political. We're supposed to be kind of calm, giving out the fact it hasn't worked. We're talking about a consensus of 99% of climate scientists who are saying that what has to happen, and what has to happen now, is a World War I type mobilisation, World War II type mobilisation of the country, of the world, in order to bring fossil fuel emissions down to net zero. Not by 2050, by 2025, or actually, really, we're not in pretty much any chance of staying within 1.5 degrees, which is what we need. Yes, question over here.
You said, can you tell me a little bit about the IPCC
Yeah.
and consensus and the extent to which the lowest common denominator has been selected as put forward by the IPCC and where that sits within the range?
So the IPCC, this is what's challenging, because the IPCC is, again, written by climate scientists, and scientists by definition are not allowed to give advice, we're not allowed to suggest policy, we're not allowed to talk about risk, we're only allowed to say this is the evidence, this is what we are right now. So necessarily, it's not that climate scientists have underplayed it, it's simply that climate scientists, all they can say is that we simply don't know what will happen next. And what is being said by the IPCC is that if we get to carbon zero by 2050 globally, which means we need to get there much quicker, as I've explained, that's globally, not us 2050, but globally. If we get to global net zero by 2050, we have between a 50 to 66% chance of staying beneath 1.5 degree of warming. I don't want to take those odds, and that's even if we get there, which we're not on target to. That is what the IPCC is saying. Does that answer your question? Not quite. Not quite.
My understanding, and I am not a scientist, is that the IPCC reports are scrutinised by politicians, and what is projected, it's only the consensus view that says where we're heading. But there are a lot of scientists, as I understand,
who are saying it's
we're
worse.
in a lot worse
Yes,
situation.
okay, I want to come to that. Thank you. Thank you. So the question here was actually, that's the consensus view of where we might get to, but there are a lot of scientists out there, 3 or 4 really, really senior climate scientists out there, who are saying actually the situation is far worse than this. And this is absolutely true. I'm not saying it's true that it's worse, but it's true that there are top climate scientists who are saying that it is a lot worse than this. These are professors of climate science. One big challenge, which is what's leading to these declarations of it being a lot worse than we think, is that climate modelling is fundamentally a tricky situation. Sorry, can I move back a bit? Climate modelling is hard. It is hard to make models that accurately represent what could happen in the future, right? These are simulations. And a lot of these climate models are proving to be inadequate. Not because scientists have done something wrong, not because they've like not given good enough models, because simply models can't predict it. And actually what is happening now across the globe is happening much, much faster than a lot of these climate models have predicted. The IPCC necessarily is based on the models. The recommendations, the Paris Agreement, are based on the models, but the models are simply not showing us what is actually happening today, how much faster things are spinning out of control. We are passing and going towards various tipping points, which could actually then accelerate warming much, much, much faster. And a lot of these models and a lot of the reports don't take this into account. So actually this is a hugely important point that's just been raised, is that what we're basing our projections on, what we're basing what needs to happen on, is something that's really even best case scenario anyway. And actually things could change very soon, in which case we're already too late. So there's no point saying, oh, we've got till 2050. You know, things could change tomorrow, things could change in 5 years' time. That actually takes us to a point of no return. And again, none of this is anything that can be said categorically by climate scientists, which is why it's not been said, because climate scientists can't kind of do that whole like, oh, it could be this. We're trained not to. We're trained to say, this is the evidence of what's happening now, this is what we might predict. But the point is it could happen, and what's far scarier than what is happening now is what we don't know. What's far scarier than what we do know is what we don't know and what might happen. And that's what a lot of climate scientists are now saying. So unless we take action now, unless we take action right now, we really risk getting into a situation where unknown things could start to happen. And we have no idea how we would even begin to get ourselves out of those situations. Yeah, question here.
Yes, so what are the chances of somehow like desalinising water, using solar power and starting to recreate the desert?
So look, there are mechanisms, mitigation strategies, carbon capture strategies where we can try to desalinate water, as has been asked here, where we can try and get the desert sort of come back from desertification. There are mechanisms being tried, but the point is it's not happening yet, it's not happening fast enough, and just as important, more important, is that governments are not putting enough funding into it. They're really not. You know, I've got a personal friend who had an amazing strategy, amazing scheme for ways in which to convert carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and it hasn't been bankrolled by the government. You know, this is happening. You know, I know a lot of scientists who are working on these issues and they can't afford to do it because the government are not paying for it. So yes, there are possibilities of what could happen, but can we really wait that long? Can we really wait and say, okay, we might come up with scientific ways to bring the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, to reduce the salinity, the saltiness of our seas? Another big issue in the seas, by the way, to do with global warming, is that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, not only does it cause warming of the atmosphere, but it dissolves directly in the oceans. And that decreases the pH of the oceans, makes it more acidic. Now, you've probably heard about this, that acidity in the oceans is a massive, massive problem, as is heat stress in the oceans, which is causing bleaching and ultimately death of our coral reefs. Coral reefs are not only beautiful, but they are a hugely important part of the ecosystem in the ocean, and they also protect a lot of coastal areas from flooding and from storms and from impacts from the ocean. Because of acidification, lots of tiny sea creatures in the ocean are also no longer able to survive because they can't get the chemicals that are required to make their shells. Again, this might seem minimal, however, these are at the bottom of the food chain. If they die, then the fish die. If the fish die, then the things that feed off the fish die. If the things that feed off the fish die, then ultimately we die. You know, we don't have enough food to eat. So these are all massive, massive impacts that are going up and up and up. It's predicted that if emissions continue as they are, that the state of acidification in the oceans by the end of the century will be different. The oceans will be a different place to anywhere seen in the last 14 million years. That's how much the oceans are changing. I also want to talk about the land. Now, this is partly due to climate change, and this is partly due to human action such as clearing, deforestation, and changes in land use. But due to all of this, we are changing up to 76% of the land on this planet to do with the way we're using it. Apart from deforestation and forest fires, the biggest impact here is loss of our soil. Now, 95% of the food that we eat requires healthy soil in order to be grown. So not only could freak extreme weather, which is getting more and more likely, ruin crops and damage the ability of us to be able to feed ourselves, but also with the constant loss of our soil, which has been made worse by clearing land to clear land for agriculture, and also made worse by climate change because extreme weather actually causes erosion of the soil. So we depend on our soil. It takes 150 years to form just 2.5 centimeters of topsoil. We have now lost 50% of our topsoil. In order to help to recreate topsoil, one of the most important creatures on the planet, which usually helps to repair damaged topsoil, are earthworms. We have lost 80% of our earthworms due to the biodiversity crisis. A lot of species of worms are going extinct. Yes, worms. So we're losing our soil. We're losing the integrity of the land, the ability to grow crops. Yes.
On the Independent online, it's reported that James Brown, Paralympic, has climbed on top of a plane at the airport.
So just to round up, in terms of the biodiversity crisis, we have caused damage to our soil, we have caused damage to our land, we are extremely jeopardizing the ability of us to be able to feed ourselves. Imagine bringing our children, our grandchildren into a world where we haven't got enough food on the shelves in our supermarkets, where we're not able to rely on imports from countries because the crops have been damaged due to droughts, where we're not able to rely on food because the soil is compromised and we can't grow it. Imagine bringing our children or our grandchildren into a world that because of this, there is civil unrest, there is conflict, and ultimately war. And these are quotes that are being made by climate scientists. We've got on our scientists' table just back here, we've got a flyer with a list of quotes that we've compiled from top members of the UN, economists, financial advisors and scientists across the world about the probability of world war, of conflict, of crisis, of societal collapse. A lot of it due to lack of food, a lot of it due to lack of shelter, a lot of it due to flooding, people being displaced from their homes, migrants coming in from across the world, climate refugees having nowhere to go. This is a crisis that's happening across the world, that's already happening. It's the biggest impacts right now are being happening not in this country, but scientists have said that this will have a knock-on effect. It will come here. It's a crisis that's impacting the poor today, but it will impact the rich tomorrow. And we're not talking in 10, 20, 30 years' time, we're talking potentially much, much sooner than that. 1 million species across the world are at threat of extinction. 1 million species. We depend on the living ecosystems around us for our food, for our shelter, for our medicines. The UK is the worst, one of the worst countries across the globe in terms of our loss of biodiversity. In the last Earth report from the UK, one in 5 British mammals was threatened with extinction. The new report that came out just a few weeks ago now says it's 1 in 4. This is changing on a yearly basis. We are losing our insects. The bee, one of the most important species on the planet, is now at threat of extinction. Without the bee, we cannot pollinate our flowers and our crops. That means things can't grow. That means that creatures who feed on these crops can't survive. That means we who rely on these creatures for our food or for our livelihoods also won't survive. We are impacted by every living creature on this planet. We need them for our survival. Scientists are saying now that we have already entered the 6th mass extinction event. This is defined as a rapid loss, extinction of species across the planet. The last time this happened to this extent was 540 million years ago. And at that point, 97% of our species went extinct. We are losing species, 60% average populations of creatures across the planet. There's a loss of 60% of our species, of our populations, of those species that are still left. We're losing forest elephants, who play a really important role in what's called being forest gardeners in forests across the world. They garden. What that means is they thin out the forest. They get rid of the sort of smaller trees and they leave behind the big trees, which are then more able to grow. These big trees are responsible for locking in from the atmosphere enormous amounts of carbon dioxide. If we lose the elephants, their role is gone and we release even more carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. There are fires raging in the Arctic. These fires are actually unlocking peat, setting fire to peat, which unlocks even more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Permafrost is thawing, re-emitting methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. There are feedback loops that we're entering into where more and more is now being released. We have something called the albedo effect, which means that if we lose our ice, the more ice we lose, the more sun heat will get radiated, the less heat will get reflected back into space, and the more will get absorbed by the darker oceans underneath, leading to even more warming. This is a knock-on effect, and it's getting faster. So I just want you, for people who are saying to you, oh, is this really happening? Is it really going to impact us? Is it going to happen in our lifetimes? Listen to the samba band. The samba band are coming.
Yeah,
I'll wind up. But just to leave you with this, this sense that like, this is not something that's happening somewhere else. It might be happening somewhere else right now, but it's something that's happening to us. It's something that's going to be happening to us. What are you going to say to your children, to your grandchildren, when this starts to impact their lives? People are saying, insurance companies are starting to say that the world is going to become uninsurable because they're simply not going to be able to afford to insure for the damage that's being done. Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, says we're heading towards financial instability. It's about financial things, it's about personal things, it's about emotional things, it's about how we feel about our planet, but also what the damage it's going to do to our lives, to the lives of our families. 80 people a day die from air pollution in the UK alone, from air pollution caused by fossil fuels. 80 families every day are losing a family member due to air pollution. They are already impacting us across the country, not just people across the globe. There was one more question down here.
Why do you consider cutting down on beef good enough when the IPCC clearly states that animal agriculture is responsible for more climate gases than all means of transportation?
Yeah, so I'm saying that cutting down on beef is a good thing. I'm just saying it's not enough. We need to get structural changes from the government. Any more questions before we get...
Why would you not consider going vegan a better suggestion than just cutting down on beef?
So the question is, why would you not consider going vegan better? Going vegan is absolutely the best thing you can do. Absolutely the best thing you can do. But what I'm saying is that for those, not probably you here today, but for those of you people in your lives who are saying, oh, we can't do that, just try to encourage people that even just cutting down on beef and lamb would have massive impacts. Sorry. Even cutting down on beef and lamb, those are the things that are going to do the biggest impacts. Cutting down on flying. Yes, if you can go vegan, even better. Any last few questions? Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, XR have talked a lot about climate justice and are making this into a human rights issue.
It is a massive human rights issue.
I mean, what worries me just as an individual is that the massive decarbonisation measures that we'll have to take are going to end up having enormous human rights and equality impacts in their own right. They're going to exacerbate inequality.
Okay, so the problem...
damage the worst off. How do we stop things?
The issue that's been brought here, which is a very valid one, along with the other issues that we've heard about the impacts of reducing our fossil fuel use so rapidly, so quickly, is that also could lead to infringement of human rights and be a human right issue. Absolutely, which is why Extinction Rebellion are not offering solutions. What we're asking is for the government to tell the truth about the severity of what's going on in the world around the climate crisis and around the ecological crisis. What we're asking is for them to commit to getting to carbon zero by 2025. And in order to deal with these issues, what we're asking is for them to call on a citizens' assembly so that people, you, the masses, can be given an opportunity to choose how we best deal with this situation. 1,000 randomly selected people across the country to actually decide what actions do we want to take, how do we make sure that people are actually served best whilst making the changes, the World War II mobilisation as it's been called, that are required now in order to give us even a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees C, which gives us, even then, not great outlook for our future. And if we don't do that, then we risk catastrophic loss of life, incalculable suffering, and hurtling towards conflicts, World War II, and financial breakdown and societal breakdown. So I think given that the Samba ban are fast approaching, I think we should support the Samba ban. I think if anyone else has got any questions, please come and talk to the Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. We have a tent back here, a desk back here. We also have a Facebook group called Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. Please also have a look at the amazing science content on the website, on the Extinction Rebellion website. We have an emergency page that details all the science that I've been sharing with you today. I will also be releasing a report based on that emergency page at some point, so look out for that. Come and find me and ask me questions, take a flyer. There's lots of flyers, there's booklets. Take them, pass them on, talk to anyone, and if anyone still isn't sure, find me, find one of the other climate scientists. You can find me on Twitter at Dr. Emily Grossman. Find me there, tweet me, talk to me, ask me to come along or ask me questions anytime you want. But other than that, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. watching. Thank you to the scientists who are supporting us.